At some point in the classic era, Sega wanted to have a fighting game involving Sonic and his friends. Unfortunately, it didn't really come to America. It didn't really leave Japan because Sega didn't want the image of their franchise. Yeah, it takes 15 seconds until you can actually do anything. I hate sitting through the logos and not being able to skip past them. But anyways, Sega didn't think that Robotonic? Really? Yeah, they actually misspelled his name as Robotonic. Dr. Robotonic. Anyways. And you have to get 8 Chaos Emeralds to get to the rocket that leads you to Eggman. But there are 7 Chaos Emeralds in the Sonic franchise normally. And this is part of why people say that this game isn't canon to the rest of the franchise. I don't really agree with that because, well, you get cloned by Eggman at some point in the game. And whenever you win a fight with an opponent, you earn a Chaos Emerald as your reward. So I'm thinking that maybe the 8th Chaos Emerald is the result of you winning the fight with their clone, because you had an emerald going into the fighting tournament to begin with. Just like everybody else, they needed a Chaos Emerald to enter in the first place. Now another problem I have with the plot is why anyone would agree to fight Sonic in the first place when they could just all gather the Chaos Emeralds for Sonic and immediately go to Eggman. I think what's happening here is that all of the opponents are brainwashed by Eggman, and that's why even Tails is fighting Sonic. I'm not really sure why Sonic would be okay with fighting Tails, but unfortunately it wasn't until Sonic Gems collection that people were able to experience this outside Japan, because they thought it was too violent. Even though it's not really violent, it's because it's so cartoonish. I mean, when you knock out a character, they have white eyelids. They have white eyelids for some reason. And their eyeballs morph to represent their clothes. It's like the Sad AM cartoons. It looks really awful. I just love how satisfying it is attacking an opponent. You hear these satisfying smacking sounds every time that you attack them. There's a lot of feedback, and I like it. Knuckles is pathetically easy because he's the first opponent, but later on the game starts getting harder. Like, I found Amy really annoying because she constantly spams her barrier. And the really cheap thing about this game is that when you go use a barrier, then you can attack instantly after you put that barrier down. Instantly. So your opponent brings up a barrier, but because he had a barrier up, you couldn't attack him. And then he instantly brings his barrier down and attacks you, because he's able to attack you in between the time that it takes for you to wind up another attack. So I feel like that's really cheap. They shouldn't be able to attack right after they let down a barrier. And you can keep attacking the opponent while they have the barrier up, and eventually it'll break. But if you do that with Metal Sonic at the end of the game, then he'll turn red and it'll become impossible to beat. A lot of people like to say that this game is too easy because you could beat it with just one button. And I can sort of get where they're coming from because Sonic Spin Dash is so overpowered. But I don't really understand how you're supposed to get past a certain point in the game. Because I can never even make it to Metal Sonic. And a lot of people say that Metal Sonic is ridiculously hard to beat. I mean, there's a way to cheat his AI, but I think this game's a lot harder than people give it credit for. Granted, I'm not skilled at fighting games, but I was able to beat Street Fighter 2 with Chun-Li just fine. I mean, granted, I just mashed buttons until I got to the final boss, and then I had to start using strategy, but still. Bark is pretty annoying to fight too. I don't really know what the options menu options do, because it's so badly translated into English that I have no idea what the controls screen tells me. They have all sorts of stages that reference previous levels, like there's a Mushroom Hill Zone. Although it doesn't have the actual music or anything like it, which is disappointing. You've got SPO for Knuckles Chaotix, but nobody else. And this makes sense considering that in the manual for Knuckles Chaotix, all the Chaotix members are there on Carnival Island for their own reasons. So it makes sense that only SPO would be here. SPO is my second favorite character to play next to Sonic. And all the different characters have their own different ways of fighting, their own tiering, obviously. Like, Bark is a tank. He's slow, but powerful. And Tails has his attack where he grabs you and he starts flying. And Amy fights with the Pico Pico Hammer. This is the first game in the franchise where Amy fights with a Pico Pico Hammer. And Tails has a sort of hammer of his own in Tails' Adventure. So it may be possible that the reason Amy has her hammer is because Tails gave it to her. I always skip the replays because they feel like a waste of time. I think this game has a fantastic soundtrack. Like, Giant Egg, or no, I think it was called Giant Wing, Sonic's theme. That is easily one of my favorite songs in the game. Because it's so frantic, and it does such a great job of giving you a frantic and awesome theme. And I love the instrumentation. Like, I love how it sounds like violins and pianos in the background. Doesn't really suit Sonic as a character, but it still sounds really good. I love the fact that the Supersonic theme doesn't sound extremely repetitive and short. Because up to this point, that's how all the Supersonic themes have been. And it feels like a punishment for actually getting into Supersonic form. Getting Supersonic in this game is really annoying because you have to win every match without dying up until the second round Metal Sonic. And only then can you transform into Supersonic. You don't win the Chaos Emerald from an opponent if you die to him even once. And that's really cheap. Like, Metal Sonic is hard enough to fight, and you're expected to win the first round against him without dying, and only then can you transform into an invincible form and defeat him. Fang is pretty easy because you can just spin dash and it'll deflect his Pac-Man pellet projectiles, and you can attack him no problem. He looks really lame in this game. Like, he's too short to my liking. Like, all the other characters look just fine. I'm okay with how Sonic looks. Like, Sonic looks pretty short, but he's supposed to be because he's a kid. Classic Sonic is 10 years old. But Fang, I never really imagined him as a kid. Because he's Fang the Sniper, you know. Like, that makes me imagine at least a 20-year-old. For the most part, the graphics are pretty okay, though. There was originally planned to be a Saturn version of this game, but sadly it was just restricted to the arcades. But I don't think that makes this game non-canon all by itself, because there's plenty of franchises where arcade games are canon. Bean the Dynamite and Bark the Polar Bear made their first appearance in this game. And in the Archie comics, there's this crazy group of criminals that accompany Fang. I don't see why they can't be like that in the game canon too. Unfortunately, Bean and Bark never really make another appearance. Which feels like a waste of a character, to be honest. I don't know why they can't come back. Like, I'd rather Bean and Bark and Fang come back than they introduce yet another boring, one-dimensional monster villain. It's annoying how sometimes you're knocked on the back and you feel completely helpless. And when you jump towards an opponent, you have such a short, gimped jump. It feels really awkward. You move so slowly, back and forth. Like, this fighting game feels kind of stiff, to be honest. I do love how this is the only fighting game that ever has an actual explanation for for why, when you have two of the same character, how that's possible. Because Eggman apparently cloned Sonic. Although this brings up the question of what happened to the clone Sonic afterwards, and why did Eggman take advantage of him more often? And I guess the clone machine had programming in it that would make the clone Sonic willing to fight Sonic. But yeah, this is what I think explains the 8 Chaos Emeralds. Sonic had a Chaos Emerald coming in here, and so when he was cloned, the clone Sonic had a Chaos Emerald as well. And then after this game, the 8th Chaos Emerald sort of vanished into proper logic because the universe is used to there being only 7 Chaos Emeralds, because they're this cosmic keystone thing. So the 8th Chaos Emerald disappears afterwards because it's not really supposed to exist. Yeah, I gave up.